yesterday when we started our old pine box, we did step one. We made our two ends and our two sides. And so now we're going to do step two. Step two is very similar, but we start with two 12-inch long rough cut boards, and they were rough cut on the miter saw. And what we need to do is go through the whole process again of making these into square lumber. So we look at our plans, we notice they're going to be 5/8 thick, they're going to be 5 1/4 wide, and they're going to be 9 1/4 long. So when I'm doing the process, there's a poster here to help you. I'm going to do cupped face down on the jointer. I'm going to plane them to thickness. Then I'm going to table saw each of them to 5 1/4 wide. And then I'll make sure I have square ends, and I'll cut them to finished length on the miter saw. Then I'll have basically all the parts for my box besides the handle, and I'll be able to move forward from there. Okay, well folks, we are in construction building our old pine box. And if you're done steps 1 and 2, step 1 you should have got 2 sides and 2 ends cut to perfect length, width, and thickness. Step 2, you should have been able to get your bottom and top cut again to width, length, and thickness. So now we're going to do steps 3, 4, and 5. So the next thing we're going to do is route chamfers on our top and bottom using the router table. So if we can just travel over there. Okay, so this is a router table, and it has a router attached on the underside, and it's mounted upside down. It has a fast planing blade and a fence, and we're going to always travel this way on it, and it's going to make a little fancy edge. The spawn switch is here, down and left. The danger zone is basically you have to just use common sense here. You don't want to slip into the blade ever if you slipped off the wood. So if you're uncomfortable with the piece you have or it might fly, you should use a clamp or some type of holding device. I also wear ear protection because it's quite a loud tool. For this, I want this nice piece to be my top, and I want to do the bottom side of my top. So here goes. I have one edge done, and that's the bottom side of my top piece. You'll notice I held the board against when I was going along the end grain to avoid tear out, so it didn't tear the fibers. Now I'll do the top side of my bottom. Also, if you don't get a nice clean edge on the first pass, you can go again like you saw me do there, just to make sure you got as nice as you want. Okay, now we're going to travel back here, and we're going to make finger joints on our sides and ends. Okay, so now here's one of the trickier steps on the pine box. We want to make finger joints on our sides and our ends. And so basically these are kind of two zipper-like joints that come together. What we do is we use this jig that has another router mounted on the bottom. The first step is to set the height of the blade, and we basically want our height just a hair above our lumber. Then we are going to use this to make the finger joints. It's you have to think ahead and not screw them up. They have to align perfectly. So the first finger I make, I use in the end to make my first space. If you screw it up, you basically have to restart and make all your pieces again. So take the time to think ahead. So, keep your fingers away from the blade, but it is quite predictable, so you can use it reasonably safely. Just keep them as far away as possible. Now, I've done one side of one end, and I need to make a corresponding corner for a side. So I use the first finger I made to make a corresponding space. Now, a lot of students struggle to make these finger joints, so let me try to be as clear as possible. If the corners need to match up, if this is corner 1, I would also number this 1, this would be 2, and 2. This would be 3 and 3. And this would be 4 and 4. That way, once I make my finger joints on a corresponding side, I can do the corresponding space using that first finger. So 1 and 1 will go together using the first finger created on the end to create the first space on the side. Think it through. The first finger on the end will create the first space on the side. And now you notice they fit together quite tight, but my fingers and my spaces align perfectly. Just be careful when you do the other side that you have the same setup, that your finger and finger are on the top. If they don't fit together quite perfectly, you can put them into a clamp and just ever so gently, just file a little bit out, and then they'll squeeze together better. Once you have all four corners with corresponding finger joints, the next stage before we assemble our box is to sand it, all your parts completely. Because once the box is assembled, you can't sand the inside and such. So at this point, pencil marks, we're going to use a blue sander with either 80 or 120 grit on and sand all your parts, your sides, your ends, your top. But don't round off corners, just sand the flat portions, the ends, and the edges. Don't round off the corners because you don't want to do that, it won't assemble nice. Once you've sanded all with rough grit, you can switch to 220 grit, and again you want to sand all your parts.